Welcome back. Here's a recitation by Oyinkan Braithwaite. It's called She Didn't Say No.
Who is she? That young girl walking down the street with tears in her eyes. Her skirt so short you're afraid to look twice. And boobs popping out her top got you hypnotized. Got you asking for her number, failing to notice that her hands are ice. That her look is empty, not sexy. Her lips so sweet, you can't tell it's a grimace, not a smile. Because it's such a treat to have her kiss, you forget to ask her age, or you want it to seem like it's a miss. Take all you want, give nothing back. In this world, we look out for our own need. So you fail to see her bleed, because you think she's done it before, that she's just a common whore. So you can walk away without looking back to see the damage you have done. She's walking the next street now. You're already telling your guys how it's been. Before she's knocking on a door, they're already asking for more. All she wanted was a bit of shelter, but you can't hear her, her silent prayer. You think you know what she wants. Her disdain is just a front. Obviously, what else could it be? Unwilling? Not likely. Her record is in the Guinness book. You're not taking anything that hasn't already been took. Because she's not saying no, you're convinced that's what she came here for. No, you're not one to commit. And if you were, she's not it. You're looking for a naive virgin, someone too innocent to realize that you're not worth a thing. So you send her on her way, trembling, because she's cold inside out, calling you names, shit, suck her loud, thinking at least it'll be warm in hell.
Oyinkan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I have to say, I absolutely loved your poem.
Thank you.
And okay, so let me get this right. Is it about, well, I gather that the girl lost her virginity, right? Because the bleeding part, or am I getting this wrong?
No, you're getting it right. It's just when I was writing it, at some point I think she was more than one woman, so it's you know, so it might be someone who's just lost it, or it might be someone who's been doing it for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Wow.
I really love the line in the beginning where you talked about how, you know, they see someone who's sexy, but in her eyes it's just a sense of emptiness. I thought it was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So tell us a little bit about how you got into poetry. How did you begin writing?
I think I've been writing as long as I've been reading. Like when I was really young, I think I remember there was this song about a bowler. I wish I was a bowler, and I remember.
I know the song.
Yeah,
I wish I
was a little bit taller. I wish I was a bowler. Yeah.
I remember literally writing it line for line. I think I changed a few things, but and that's even though it was a song, it's rap. You know, even rap is a bit, you know, it's poetry. It really is. So I had already sort of started to relate to that, and I've been doing it for a while. It's cool.
What inspired that poem in particular, the one you just performed for us?
It started out as a poem about double standards, and it kind of morphed into something else, but I wanted to write something that addressed how when men do something, it's
seen as
the
norm, basically.
Yeah, and then when women do it, it's negative. You know, this exact same act has different consequences for different people, but it kind of morphed into something else. But I think there's still a little bit of that in it to some extent.
Do you feel like sometimes whenever you recite a poem that people tend to personalize and immediately think that the poem is about you?
I'm afraid of that. I don't know how often I've come across it, but I really am afraid of people's reactions too, because my topics tend to be very dark. I know my parents, you know, often used to worry that maybe I was writing out of something that was happening to me. So it is something that I feared, and for a while I kind of stopped writing because I was afraid of people looking at me a certain way and thinking I was a certain type of person, and you know, but it doesn't bother me as much now. Some people might think that, oh, you're always judging maybe men. And I write about sex quite a bit because the consequences of it fascinate me. But, you know, I don't let that bother me as much as it used to now. So.
You said in your blog something along the lines of, you're not as good as a writer as you hope you could be.
Yes.
Why is that?
I think sometimes what I want to get pass across in my head, I struggle with it, and I think also a lot of writers I I think. I mean, I've got friends who are writers and so on, and I feel sometimes when you've been in the industry for a while, you can feel overwhelmed by this need to be perfect, by this need to be the best, by this need to, you know, really wow people with your words, and so you end up constraining yourself. You end up not writing anything because you know everything you write is just horrible and you hate it. And you know, so often I might write 50 poems and only 2 of them are worth anything as far as I'm concerned. So that's kind of.
But in saying that, if you're reading someone else's poem or you hear someone else's poem, do you automatically find that you're critiquing it at all? Like, that sounds a bit weird, or why would they do this, or why did they write it like that? Do you think of does that ever happen?
Yeah, it does. I mean, when I was in university, we used to have workshops. You know, so we were encouraged to critique each other's work anyway. And sometimes I don't want to come across as being overly critical. There are some things that will sound funny to the ear or look funny to the eye. I mean, sometimes people write and they don't edit. That's another thing with poetry. They feel like they've written it down and it's good, it's whatever. But you should really go back on it and look at it, or leave it for a week and go back and look at it. So you can usually tell when somebody hasn't spent time, even if you're not a poet, spent time on a poem. You can tell if you've got cliches, things that you should avoid, you know, lines that you know you heard somewhere
like in a song or something.
You've seen like in my Angelou poem, they decided they like it, they've written an imitation of it. Those kind of things, I think, are like red flags. But other than that, I mean, it's hard to critique any kind of art. Yeah, anyway, because you know, someone can justify it. And my lecturers say, if we tell you something, you can justify why it has to stay there.
Okay, Oyinkan, we're going to take a quick break. Now, is poetry a viable source of income? Find out after the break.
Welcome back. It's the Poetry Slam on Moments with Mo, and we are back with the lovely Oyinkan Braithwaite. So before the break, you know, we wanted to get into the part where we begin to talk about the actual ability to be a poet and to generate some income. Okay. So, as a poet, is it a viable source of income for you?
For me personally, no. I've not really. To be honest, I've sort of focused on my other types of writing because I don't only write poetry. And part of the reason is because to make money from poetry is really, really difficult. People don't really read. I mean, a lot of people are writing it, but not so many people are reading poetry. I don't even think a majority of people who are writing it are reading it. So. And I'm one of the few people I know who actually buys collections of poetry. It's rare, so, and even when I do, most of the time it's of poets who are already popular. So to just go into a bookstore and a poet you've never heard of before.
I mean,
you know,
even when I read poems, I usually read them online. I read it through people's blogs. I never really consider the fact that I'd go into a store and I would buy someone's collection of poems.
And I think also, I mean, it kind of comes back to what you said about critiquing, because it takes, like, for some people it might take them 5 seconds to write a poem, so there's so many poems floating around and they're not really being edited the way stories would be. So there's a lot of sort of not so good material, you know, swimming around, and that's also another thing where you have to sort of go through loads and loads of poems before you found one that really touched you. So it's not, I think, which is one of the good things about performance poetry, because I think performance poetry has a greater chance of reaching people than written poetry does. So, because with performance poetry, you probably get hired for events and
to come and perform in front of someone.
and that sort of.
So, if you're a performance poet, would you also be considered a spoken word artist? Is that the same thing?
I think they're used interchangeably, but I think also if you're spoken word, you might not necessarily be a poet. So it's kind of, but I these days they're sort of used interchangeably. I don't really consider myself to be a performance poet because most of my poems I don't perform, just maybe 1 or 2 that I would stand up and. So most of the time I just write it for the eye, and the way I'd even arrange it on the page would be for the eye and not so much for the ear. But we're actually, myself and Raya, who's also
she's going to be coming on later,
and 2 other poets, we've sort of come together to do an audio collection of poetry.
That's fantastic.
So we're kind of excited about that. But aside from that, I don't really focus so much on performance.
Oyinkan, thank you so much. It's been great having you on the
And
show.
your poem, like we said earlier, was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Our next guest studied law but chose to embrace her creative side. After the break, Rayo Adebola takes the stage.